Hello, my name is Heaser, and I'm an independent archaeological researcher, a jewellery maker and a writer. I am researching the beautiful, colourful glass beads of early medieval times in Europe. Many thousands of these beads have been found in women's graves from that time in both Britain and Europe. And I used my hot glass beadmaking skills to work out how the beads were made, and this gives me an understanding of the techniques of the ancient bead makers, their likely tools and their materials. Here are some examples of the beads that I have been studying from collections in museums. They look dull on the surface because they have decayed in the soil, but their colours are still quite bright, and you can see what wonderful patterns they have. There is a lot of similarity in the beads found across Europe. The people shared similar tastes in the early medieval period. For a realistic experiment on how these ancient beads were made, it is important to use only tools and materials that would have been available then. I use replicas of tools found on early medieval sites. A mandrel for making beads on, tweezers for pulling threads of hot glass, a needle for combed patterns, tongs for shaping cylinders and cubes, and a knife for marvering. To make glass beads, you need a controlled source of heat to melt the glass, and studies and experiments suggest that the ancient bead makers could have used a variety of furnaces or even an open hearth fired by wood or charcoal. This picture shows an example of a possible small furnace. I use a simple propane blowtorch, which supplies a similar temperature to an open hearth, about 1100 centigrade. This is good convenience, as building and working with a replica furnace would have slowed my experiments considerably. Here is the glass used to make beads, and excavations have shown these forms were all used by ancient bead makers. This modern soda-lime glass is very similar to ancient glass. Rods are the most convenient type to use. Glass tessera for mosaics are a handy size for transporting, and these are the fine threads used to decorate multicoloured beads. Here is a simple bead being made. The mandrel is coated with clay slip so that the bead can be removed easily when cooled. The end of the glass rod is heated until it melts, and the hot glass is wound round the mandrel to make the bead. It is then heated in the flame and forms a perfect round shape. Here are some examples of shaping and decorating beads. This shows working with wooden tongs that have been dipped in water to stop them burning. I am making a cylinder bead. And here I am using tweezers to pull a thread of glass, a stringer, that will be used to decorate beads. And here is the stringer being applied to a bead to make a wave pattern. The added glass sinks into the surface with more heating. Once the beads have been cooled, they are soaked on the end of the mandrels in water to soften the clay slip. And then, with a bit of effort, the mandrel is removed, and there is the finished bead. For this paper, I will concentrate on the mosaic beads made using millefiori as decoration, and here are some examples found in Britain. They seem to have first appeared in Hellenistic times and are decorated using slices cut from pre-made glass rods that have patterns running through their lengths. These pattern rods are called canes and require considerable skill to make. A particular pattern can be traced from the Middle East
across Europe to Britain or Scandinavia, and gives possibilities of studying lines of trade.
Here is an example of a millefiori cane being made. This is going to be a bullseye cane. The sequence is speeded up to save time for this film. First, the end of a rod of red glass is melted and shaped into a cylinder for the centre core. Then white glass is wrapped round the core to make the second layer. The glass is tonged to consolidate. Next, dark blue translucent glass is wrapped round the white. The mass is further tonged and shaped into a square cross-section, ready for pulling into a longer cane. A clear rod is attached to the free end of the cane and the whole is heated and then pulled to elongate it. The cross-section becomes thinner and the cane much longer during this process. Finally, the clear rod is removed and the cane allowed to cool slightly. It is then plunged into sand or vermiculite to cool slowly. So here is the finished cane with the ends trimmed. You can see the pattern inside. I'm using modern cutters for convenience, lining them up and then cutting into the pot so the slices don't ping off. And these are the cane slices, and showing the cane that they were cut from. The ancient bead makers would not have had a modern cutters, and so would probably have used a hammer and hardy like this to cut the cane. I have spent many hours trying to work out how the beads were made. There are several possible ways. The literature calls most of these beads wrapped, because fissures between the canes and end caps are often visible. But these could just be lack of fusion between the elements while making, combined with deterioration in the soil. Modern bead makers apply canes to a base bead and then heat them in. I decided to try out all the different methods I could think of to see which resulted in the greatest similarity to the ancient beads. Millefiori beads were made both as cylinders and globular beads. First, I will demonstrate the simple winding method. Here is the type of bead I'm now going to demonstrate. It uses the cane we have just made and another which is an 8-petalled flower. Here are the cane slices being preheated on a simple nightlight. First, clear glass is applied to the mandrel in a thin coating. This acts as glue for the cane slices to be stuck to. Then here is the first cane slice being pressed onto the hot glass. And here comes the second one. It's a tricky business because if the cane slices are heated too fast in the flame, they will shatter. It's also important to be fairly accurate with the positioning so there isn't too much space between each cane slice as you press it on. I'm alternating the different cane slices to build up the bead. Cane slices in place, a total of 8 different slices, 4 from each pattern, alternating around the bead. Now tonging to consolidate, and as the heating continues, the cane slices move to fill the gaps between them. Now I'm removing it from the flame to cool. And here it is, the finished bead, ready to be pushed into vermiculite or sand to cool down. This technique produced the closest result to ancient beads. It was possible to see individual cane slices within the glass. Verdict? likely technique for round and shorter beads made with simple furnace. Could be made by a beadmaker working alone. Wrapped beads. This technique can be divided into two. In the first method, cane slices are arranged on a slip-coated surface and fused in a kiln into small sheets. Rods of contrasting glass for end caps can be laid in place at either end. The resulting sheets are wrapped round a mandrel and heated into beads. The result of this was similar to the first technique, but the glass was more fused together. Verdict: could be used for more rapid production of beads in a workshop with furnaces available. In the second wrapping method, whole canes are stacked and fused in a furnace to make a block. Slices cut from the block are wrapped round the mandrel as in the first method. This experiment was inconclusive, as we found it almost impossible to cut fused blocks into thin enough slices to wrap into beads, so no beads were made. The verdict: more work needed. This would be a way of making long cylinder millefiori mosaic beads in a large workshop with a form of production line. Perhaps the blocks were sawn into slices? Roman mast canes were very likely sawn. My study of millefiori mosaic beads has shown that these beads have much to reveal when the different cane slices are analysed. Cane making is one of the most difficult techniques of glass bead making, and many variables affect the end result. The skill of the glass worker, their tools, and their style. This can produce a distinctive signature within the glass, much like handwriting. The heat of the flame or furnace, the type of glass, how easily it can be shaped and manipulated. Glass varies a lot. The slicing of the canes and the way the canes are incorporated into the beads. As a result of all these variables, canes made by one bead maker are unlikely to precisely resemble those made by another, even if the styles are copied. Here is an example of signature beads. The significance is in the detail. Two virtually identical beads that must have come from the same workshop. One from Suffolk in the UK and one from the Netherlands, with a detail of one of the canes drawn on the right. Where were they made? The millefiori mosaic beads found in 6th and 7th century cemeteries in Britain and mainland Europe are considered to have originated from Roman Egypt and Syria in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. No bead-making workshops have as yet been found, but by detailed analyses of the cane patterns, it should be possible to identify specific workshops. And here are some examples. This combination of two canes is found over a wide geographic area from the Middle East to Britain. The canes look almost identical, even if the long heptagonal beads have small variations, and this indicates that they were made in the same workshops. My study of millefiori beads has been a fascinating journey and has put into practice my theory that the only way to truly understand an object is to try to replicate it. In the course of my experiments, I have often proved my initial assumptions wrong and have learned much insight into the techniques of ancient bead makers. Practicing the techniques and comparing the results with ancient beads has meant that I have begun to recognize a particular artisan's hand on beads found in different places. There is much work to be done in this area still, but it is an exciting possibility that an individual's work can possibly be identified right across Europe. As I continue my work through the many different kinds of beads, I hope to discover more unexpected techniques, revelations and surprises. Beads are tiny time capsules, and if we can understand more about how they were made and about their makers, more light can be shone onto the people of the early first millennium of the Common Era.